Hi, Mr. Maloney.
Hello.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
How are you?
So why don't we get started and talk right about the issues? So as college students, one of our top concerns is post-graduation employment. Can you elaborate with some specifics about how you hope to improve the job market for recent grads?
Well, the number one thing, I think, for college students is the cost of college education. Most of the kids I talk to and their parents are extremely worried about how much it costs to go through 4 years of college right now, and then how that matches up to what you're going to do next. So I think it's very important that we have a real conversation around college affordability, which is a big part of what you're able to do when you get out of college. Meaning, if you come out of college with $150,000 worth of debt, like some of the kids I know, it really does affect what you can do afterwards. And it puts an enormous amount of pressure on kids who might want to be teachers, who might want to serve their communities, who might want to do things that aren't just about making money and paying off their loans. And I like very much the idea that kids can pay off their college debt through community service, by giving back to their communities, by teaching in underserved communities, by doing things that benefit all of us, and in return we can make it easier to pay back loans. I also think the idea is that we might allow kids to pay back their loans as a percentage of future income is also an idea that I think is very interesting. So the first thing is the cost of education and where you end up when you get out. But when you get out, I think that the number one thing is that we have to return growth to the local economy. And one of the things we must do is we must start investing again in things that we know work, like infrastructure projects, like incubating businesses, like helping the industries of tomorrow, like wind and solar and geothermal, get started right here in the Hudson Valley. But we have to get smart about how we approach job creation, and we know what works. We've done it before. I worked in the Clinton administration for years, and we grew the economy and created 20 to 23 million new jobs, the longest economic expansion in American history. And you don't do it with government, you do it with the private sector, having the confidence to invest and grow. But government has a role to play. And so the number one thing in that cycle is going to be to get our fiscal house in order and to continue to make investments in our people, in their education, in innovation, in technologies of the future, so that we can grow this economy again. And that will create more jobs for all of you. And if you start out with not as much debt as you might otherwise have, you'll have more choices, and you'll be able to be more productive.
Sure. You mentioned investing in technologies of the future. Do you have any sort of specific ideas on what you think a technology of the future is? What kinds of places the government should be investing its money?
Well, I think it's very important that the private sector lead the way, but that government has a role to play. I also think it's very important that we actually invest in education as a job creator. Let me tell you what I mean. So when I was in the governor's office in New York, one of the things we tried to do was to create a huge endowment for the SUNY CUNY system. A lot of private schools have big private endowments. The public, higher education system in New York does not. We try to create that as a way to create a new stream of revenue, to hire new faculty, to create research centers, to fully fund capital plans. And if you look at an institution like SUNY Albany that has been the critical piece of the whole nanotechnology corridor that has sprung up in the Hudson Valley, one of the most exciting wealth-creating engines in New York, a place where many of you might want to work, where you can make a good living, do interesting work, stay right here in a great part of the world. That is a research-based and educational-based economic development model. And it would not have been possible without smart investments in public education right here in New York.
Sure.
So I think that's an excellent strategy. We should start right there.
Okay, absolutely. Switching gears a little bit, in the last decade, the U.S. has participated in a large number of major prolonged conflicts throughout the world, including some in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya. What is your hope for America's military and diplomatic future, and how specifically will you work to achieve that goal?
Well, look, we've got to wind down the war in Afghanistan. I'd like to see it happen sooner than in the administration's timeline. I do not believe that the counterterrorism mission is being accomplished by having huge numbers of American kids on the ground. I think we can accomplish that in smarter, safer, cheaper, better ways.
Like what?
Like enhanced use of drones, like enhanced use of electronic information gathering, by better use of special forces. If you look at the strategy we originally pursued in Afghanistan, which brought down the Taliban and disrupted Al-Qaeda, it was actually done by leveraging local assets with very, very few American personnel on the ground. Now, if you look at, by contrast, the war in Iraq, which I believe we never should have fought in the first place, you had an enormous dedication of money, tragic loss of 4,500 American lives, and it was very hard to articulate what the national security threat was to the United States, given that the government of Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction and had been effectively contained during the years of, President Clinton was in the White House and prior to the invasion. But the point is not to look backwards, the point is to look forward. And I think if you look at the way we're addressing terrorist threats currently, like in the Arabian Peninsula, in Yemen, for example, there are real threats to our safety and our security here. There are people out there still today who attacked us on 9/11, and there's others who would attack us in the future. And we need to be absolutely dead serious about disrupting and dismantling those organizations, about capturing and killing the people who would attack us and do us harm. But it is not the right strategy to have tens of thousands of American kids on the ground. We have spent $800 billion in Iraq. We've spent $600 billion in Afghanistan. We will spend trillions in caring for these troops that come home over your lifetime and mine. This is an enormous drain on our economy, and we should not be trying to redesign and rebuild the entire nation of Afghanistan. It's not within our power to do it, and it's time we got out. I'd like to see us get out sooner, and I'd like to see us address future counterterrorism missions smarter and better by better using technology, special forces, and drones.
So right now, and over the last few years, there's been a tremendous Arab Spring in the Middle East. There have been a lot of revolutions, a lot of governments have been overthrown. There's still a lot of discontent. What kind of strategy do you think America should pursue in dealing with these conflicts? Should we pursue them at all? What's your take on that?
Well, I think we want to be a little humble about our ability to shape events in all corners of the world, and I think we ought to be careful about assuming that the situation in one country where there's unrest is the same as another. So, for example, if you look at the situation in Libya versus, say, Syria, if you look at the situation in some of the countries like Egypt, where there's been or Tunisia, where there's been a successful revolution and something is still forming, I think you can draw different conclusions. Let me say this. I think the American action in Libya, where we leveraged an international coalition, where we provided unique assistance in the form of intelligence and air power, and we took a chance to do so. But we were dealing with a dictator who had sponsored terrorist attacks on our own citizens, like the Pan Am Lockerbie flight, that had been menacing its neighbors and the larger global community for years. I think that made a lot of sense. I do not think that's the same as being able to control everything that comes next. And particularly if you believe, as we do, that free people need to work these situations out for themselves, we should disabuse ourselves of the notion that we are going to be able to pick leaders, conduct perfect elections, or in other ways completely control or determine what happens in these societies as they go through these changes. And some are going to do better than others. If you look at the situation in Syria, where there's a massive humanitarian crisis, where you have a ruthless dictator decimating his own people, I think there's a lot more we could do, where we could establish, but again, it's different than the situation in Libya. You'd have to have a different approach, but you could establish safe zones for some of the refugees. You could certainly do more to interdict external countries like Iran from supplying arms as they're now doing. I think you've got to get serious about having the Russians participate in that, since they're the only real sponsor left of the Syrian regime. So I don't think one size fits all, but I do think when you look at the region, there's reason to hope, there's reason to believe that we're moving into an era where young people are increasingly unsatisfied that their nations are being left behind, where they're connected to the world through all sorts of social media, and they understand in a way they never were able to before what is broken in their own countries, and that emphasis for change, that desire to take risks, get on the street, be active. I think it's very exciting. But we should not kid ourselves that it's going to be simple, or that we're going to know in every case where it's going to lead.
Sure. I think we're probably running out of time, so why don't we close with this question? Going back to America, back home. In recent years, Congress has become notoriously stubborn and uncompromising, and on your website you make your anti-Tea Party position very, very clear. If elected, and in the likely event that there continue to be many Tea Party representatives in Congress, how will you work to develop a cooperative, productive relationship with your colleagues?
Well, I've done it my whole career, and I think that it's one thing to run a campaign and say, look, here's what I stand for. I think the Tea Party has done more damage more quickly to the American political system than just about anything I can think of in a long time. I disagree with the Tea Party start to finish, whether you're talking about the Ryan budget, ending Medicare, whether you're talking about defunding Planned Parenthood, making it harder for women to get contraception, whether it's all the changes they want to make that I think would really hurt the middle class, hurt the environment, hurt things that I care a lot about. But they're elected to government too, and if I'm in Congress this time next year, it's going to be my job to work with everybody. And look, I've been in the West Wing of the White House, I've been in the governor's office. Most of the things we worked on involved working with guys on the other side of the aisle. You know, I helped write the marriage equality law in New York when I worked for Elliott Spitzer. You know, we knew we couldn't pass that bill without Republican support, that we were eventually going to have to get it through the Senate with some Republican votes. It took 4 years to do it, but that's exactly what happened, and we wrote it in a way and conducted ourselves in a way that allowed for that possibility. You can't make the other guys the enemy. You have to be careful about questioning their motives, and you have to take seriously the fact that you're there to govern, that you're there to get something done. It's not just the 2-year period between now and the next election. It is the only time you have to actually get things done, and anything worth doing involves working with people with whom you may disagree very, very strenuously. But that's the job, and it's something I've done throughout my career. I'm very confident that I can do it in Congress.
Okay, well, thank you very much for meeting with me, Mr. Maloney. Thank you very much.